I was reading a book called White Guard by Mikhail Bulgakov, who was talking about the Russian Revolution between 1917 and 1919, when it was quite sort of ambiguous as to if the communists were actually going to, if Lenin was going to seize power or not. And in reading that book, and it takes place in Kiev, and it's about the whites who were sort of on the losing end of the Bolsheviks. But I thought, well, this is really, it's a fictional account of an historical moment. And that to me was kind of something quite powerful. And around that same time, I read a quote from Stalin who said, "I'm not concerned with how the court of history is going to judge our current deeds," which I found to be a very powerful statement. And that really then sort of triggered me even further when I started working on my Guggenheim Fellowship, that, as a photographer, we kind of have a right and an obligation and a duty to be that court of history. I'm not here to judge, but I am here to sort of present, your deeds, whatever it is that you do. It can be good, it can be bad. And I think that's kind of what I get quite excited about with photography, is that there is an obligation and there is a duty, and but there is sort of a way that you can do it without being blunt or obvious about it. And part of my problem that I have a lot with photojournalism and journalism in particular is that it doesn't allow nuance, and it doesn't allow you to sort of want to engage within that work. So, I've got to create something that for you to want to engage upon. And then a little bit further, again, how I work is I kind of get in a car and I just sort of drive and kind of stumble upon things. And one of the things that sort of happened to me is, you'd be in a village or a small town and, talking to people, I'm lost, where am I going? And they would say, oh, by the way, did you know that such and such event happened here? And I found what's so profound in Russia is that, there's almost a similarity to Canada. We're both sort of geographically massive countries, yet the ways that our countries were settled were actually quite different. You could say Canada has, I guess, an entrepreneurial spirit of, settling the land, as opposed to in Russia, which they have a special word for it called katorga, which means force or slavery. And if you look at, say, St. Petersburg, which is probably, one of the most beautiful cities on the planet, it was essentially built by slaves under Peter the Great, so there's always this kind of duality between beauty and katorga, slavery. So this little series here kind of began when I was, again, driving, and I would talk to somebody, say, where am I? And they'd say, well, you just so happen to be in a place that, 32 people were executed here in 1938, during the Purge, or one place I was at in Belarus, 38,000 people, so were shot in barren graves. And I thought that was very interesting. And again, from reading sort of books from, not necessarily from the era, but I definitely like to read fictional books. I was reading One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which, again, he was kind of, and there was a great little passage that Solzhenitsyn was talking about, sort of that moment of realization where what's come before is never going to come again in the future, because your life is irrevocably changed by something that's happened, by this sort of, as in Russia they call it the organs, which I find is a really sort of sinister sounding name, the organs that, have come for you. So this little series, Solzhenitsyn was talking about what happens when you get arrested, when you get interrogated, when you're sort of finally convicted of your crime and you're brought out to put on your knees and shot. And I thought, put myself in that position. I thought, what am I going to look at? Would I be looking at birds, or would I be looking out down at the ground? What would it be? So this little sort of project were all from execution sites across Russia and Ukraine, and I kind of wanted to put myself in the same position as, if there was a gun in the back of my head, where would we look? What would it is that we'd look at? So, what would be the last thing that I'd see? And then from there, sort of the latest project, that whole idea of this kind of recognition of something, of irrevocable change, I guess. In the last 4 years, I've been really wanting to do this series in an interrogation room. And it was one of the first things that I actually had seen in Russia, was an interrogation. It kind of left me appalled, but it also really made me sort of understand sort of what happens in a society when the organs are sort of left to be the organs, I guess, on their own. And again, as Stalin said, you know, he doesn't care about accountability. And I'm not just really kind of talking about sort of a communist regime or anything like that, but just any kind of regime. I mean, we could probably apply this to Burma, or we could even apply it to what happened. Maybe it's a little extreme, but, you know, with the G20 here in Toronto, with this sort of, you know, authoritarian grab of whatever it is, our right, our freedom. You know, it kind of goes back to that story of me crossing the street and the giant black Mercedes wanting to run me down. So anyways, this series began that kind of, I was really trying to examine that one flicker of moment where things sort of changed, and I thought the ultimate sort of recognition of change is the idea of confession, that, you know, you admit guilt or you admit innocence, but the fact is that you have to admit something. So
you're also searching subjects that, you know, if one connection is Jericho, if another connection is Mikhail Bulgakov and the revolution, another connection, Ivan Denisovich. You're working kind of in real time, real space, but making connections that go across hundreds of years of history.
Yeah, that's kind of a direction that that I'd like to explore further, actually, is that, and that's what kind of excites me, is this idea that I'm working today because I don't have a time machine, and I have no choice but to find something today that addresses something that happened before, you know, like the quote with Stalin that, you know, we're not concerned with the court of history. And I find that very interesting as an artist or as a photographer, whatever it is, that we are actually that court of history regardless. And so we kind of address something, and now it's just up to me to sort of go out there and find something that has that power, you know. And I don't want to be so literal to say that I did interrogations because there were interrogations back during the purges, or there was, you know, I didn't really want to photograph St. Petersburg and to say, well, here's St. Petersburg because it was built by slaves. But I think, you know, there is a latitude that we have as photographers to sort of explore contemporary issues, but, you know, using, for me, I need to have sort of a guide, a roadmap, and I like to use sort of historical references that kind of then I can keep addressing, because, you know, the whole point of history is that it just is a cycle, it's an evolution, and especially in, or it's not an evolution, especially in Russia and Ukraine, this idea that, you know, communism is just another segment on the wheel. You know, you can go back to the Tsars and feudal times, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm photographing now is essentially what happened 175 to 275 years ago.
Donald, thank you. We don't have a time machine either, and so we're going to move on to...
For this presentation, I'm going to talk about two different projects. One that I made in 1998, and the other much more recently this spring. And I'm doing this because both are the most site-specific projects that I've done, and that in a way that the paintings that were made for these exhibitions and these installations were they were made formally and thematically specifically for these spaces where they were intended to be installed. So this first project was titled Chambre avec vue, and was done in Montreal in an apartment building in the downtown area, very close to a big park that is called the Parc La Fontaine. And at the time, my paintings were done from photos that I take snapshots around in the cities where I travel, or even in Montreal, so depicting objects or locations, images that are borrowed from the urban tissue, urban material. And although there is in these images also a sense of history, memory, and a sense of loss, of maybe absence, feeling of absence that impregnated those images. And more specifically with this installation, I wanted to do something with my experience of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and to underline these concerns that I have in my work, or these interests for a certain atmosphere of melancholia, or also absence of, or like a content that is hard to figure out. And this was triggered by this specific project, by an installation that I had seen in New York City in the 96, if I remember well, by Zoe Leonard. And that was an installation that she had done in her studio, and using photographs and sculptures, but dealing with AIDS and losing artist friends in that period. And I was very, very touched by this, and very interested and kind of impressed by this exhibition, and also by another exhibition at the same time of Felix González Torres at the Guggenheim. So coming back around that time from New York, I got the Canada Council Studio in Paris and went to Europe for 4 months, and I didn't paint then, but took a lot of pictures. And coming back from that trip, I decided to make this installation. I had done installations in apartment buildings in the 1980s, but those were much more romantic in the way that they were using old apartments kind of falling apart, and the images that I was choosing were much more 19th century, relating to the history of painting and also to the more romantic kind of period of that era. Here I wanted to do something in a much more cold, kind of detached environment, very urban. And what I liked about this building also was that it's an apartment building where a lot of gay men were living in the 70s. They still do, but it's much more linked to a kind of lifestyle, of gay lifestyles, very urban from the 70s. And also the closeness to this park, which was at the time a very famous gay cruising ground, made it interesting for me as a location for this installation I wanted to make. But I was also interested in the way that nature kind of integrates itself in the urban tissue. So when you would enter the apartment, first of all, it was kind of a very discreet installation, and discreet also in the way that to approach it, you had to do a bit of research. You had to somehow go through the park, or like close to the park, so you had to have an experience of the park, or like stepping out of nature into this, crossing the street and then going into the building. Then you needed like the code to get inside, and the only way to get the code would be to call at René Blouin Gallery, or to get an invitation card. But just to get it there from just a newspaper or something, it would have been very difficult. You needed those informations. And so you would arrive and then dial the code, get into the elevator, and arrive in the apartment, which was on the 16th floor, if I remember well. And this was the first piece that was in the apartment, which was coming into the lobby. There was another corridor perpendicular to the lobby where there would be like access to 2 bedrooms, and then 1 living room, dining room, kitchen, and in each of these rooms there would be like an opening or a window or a big door, patio door, giving an overview of the city of Montreal, looking towards the west and the mountain. But So the first painting that was greeting you was a painting of representing the clothing of myself and my boyfriend at the time, who came along with me to just stay in Paris for 4 months. And we were traveling in Italy, and just like the clothes were left in a little pension room. So it's the kind of image that already gives like a first entry into this kind of atmosphere of memory, but also of passing through, and also a kind of bodily presence that is not really there. Then in the first bedroom, which was the door to the left, you would come in and there would be like 2 paintings. The whole installation was not done in the space, transformed as a gallery. It was, what I did was basically choosing in this apartment, maybe like a year prior, the opening of the installation, and then taking some pictures of it, visiting it, making the installation. All of the paintings were done specifically, as I said, for that space. And the choice of images was triggered through that. There was no spots or electrical lightning. So the space was used as a large found object, like a big ready-made. And the paintings were like small scale, very often like easel size, and just installed in the space. There was no furniture except for an office desk and a couple of chairs for the person who was looking after the exhibition, and that was it. So in that first bedroom there was this painting of a phone that was again shot during that trip in Europe, but what I liked was that like this object of communication again underlined kind of a sense of like muteness or absence, and also loss of communication or absence of communication. Facing that painting in that room was a larger painting depicting the ceiling of a tavern that I took in Brussels. And that image I liked because it had this sense again of like the party's over, or there was a party there, but all the remnants were kind of like gloomy and not really happy looking, you know. So it has kind of a bit of a mournful atmosphere to it. And there's something also about like a kind of a cosmological kind of painting that, or image, kind of a surreal kind of constellation of objects that was obtained with that image, and that I liked very much. In the second bedroom, there was a painting that I had made from a photo I took on that first visit in the apartment the year before. So I wanted to really underline the relationship between the paintings and the place that had inspired it. And although this image of this bedroom was kind of emptied of, there was no trace again of furniture or anything, except for like just a piece of wood that was leaning against the wall. And I liked how it got transformed into a kind of collection of minimalist objects, or kind of quotations of minimalist art in a way. Like the window becomes like a James Turrell, the radiator could become like some kind of Donald Judd, and the plank becomes a John McCracken or something like that. So the whole bay thing in a kind of metaphysical light, and a bit gloomy, but I think in touch with what I was trying to make in terms of atmosphere. And in the living room, the dining rooms, yes, the dining room, there was 2 paintings done from images I found in Paris. One was done. It's maybe one of the strangest paintings that I've done, according to myself, or like for myself. It's a painting done from a photo I took in La Samaritaine, which is a big, like magasin rayon, a big store, clothing store, department. Thank you. Department store in Paris. And dating from the turn of the century, and on the last floor there is a big mural painting of Art Deco style, Art Nouveau style, and I've always been fascinated by Art Nouveau, and its utopist project of integrating nature, or like joining nature and technology in a way of creating beautiful, like, daily objects that were like intended for the daily life of everybody, but that, you know, it turned after like 10 years as it was dismissed, and then modernity went into, and this sense of nature kind of disappeared. And I was intrigued by this image, and trying to make something that was a bit like of this dialogue between the city and the nature that was like in the space, in the church of the space, but also it gave me a pretext to create this kind of like geometrical abstract or semi-abstract painting. So as a kind of link towards ways that I can have a dialogue between abstraction and figuration, or representation, and various styles of abstract painting, which is something that has been in my work for a long time, but this time it was a bit more literal, and at the same time it was not. Next to it was smaller painting, which is more ambiguous, but dealing with similar issues, similar concerns about painting and abstraction, figuration, and all that. It was done from a photo I took on the Île Saint-Louis in Paris, which is an island very close to Notre Dame, except this is also like another famous cruising ground in Paris. And the photo was took from the banister, and you're looking down onto the quay. The title of this painting is the Quai de Béthune, the name of the place. But the Seine was flooding around the period where I took the painting, so you couldn't see the quay. All you could see was this floating bench, and it became this kind of symbolic image for me of the old AIDS crisis, in a very small painting that also was dealing with these more formal issues about painting, and more conceptual issues also about painting that I was interested in. And finally, in the living room, there were like 3 paintings, a kind of triptych that was facing another painting on the opposite wall. There was this flower painting, which again relates to the idea of nature in close to the building, but also like inside the apartment. And it's also a theme, or it's a motif that's been, of course, painted a lot in the course of art history, of Occidental and Oriental art history. And I was taking it as a bit of a challenge to make it, to incorporate that kind of motif into my own work and say I would translate, but I also used a painting, a photograph that was that I took in the garden of my boyfriend from the 80s, who died of AIDS in 91, and I took that picture maybe 3 or 4 days after he passed away. So it had this link again to the thematic, although these ideas were not very obvious in the paintings. I think that I like content that is not too obvious, but it is like kind of a subtext of to the image, and kind of information that is there but is not at the same time. Second painting, sorry. The second painting was done from a photo I took of a Paris wall where a sign had been removed, and it became this kind of weird abstract painting, quoting maybe Fontana or abstraction, materialist abstraction from the 1950s. And the third one was done from a photo I took of a lobby of a building in Marseille, kind of like 1950s, 60s decoration, called Les Tuiles, titled Les Tuiles, the tiles. But again, it kind of an image borrowed to a similar kind of building where the installation was taking place. And finally, facing these three paintings was like a view of Brussels from the top of the rooftop of the court hall, the Palais de Justice. And it's a place that is very urban, kind of a skateboard, kind of graffiti kind of environment, with the sky, the horizontal line of the landscape of silhouette of the city. And it is like a similar image or a similar view that you would get from the large window door that was in the apartment. And I liked this kind of like, two different places, but like shifting the same theme, the same view, but like shifting from one place to the other, and also into painting and out of painting into the reality of the city where this actual installation was taking place. And very briefly, the second piece that I'm talking about today is this piece I just did, which was done at the Museum of Fine Arts in the project room, which is like the perfect white cube. And Stéphane Aquin invited me in 2009 to do an exhibition there. And he wanted me to make a series of new paintings or like showing recent work, but along with the photographs that I work from to make my paintings. So at first I was a bit hesitant to do it because I don't consider that material really not interesting, but that it's not like art. It doesn't get to that level to me, you know. So the result is really the painting, although I take those photos in with the intention of turning them into painting, and there's already a lot of decisions while I take those photographs that are being made, but I'm not a photographer, and this is something that is more like of the order of the document, but I decided to take on the project and to do that. Very recently, these are details of some of the photos, but the work that I've been doing for the last couple of years are paintings that are done from photos I take in museums and galleries in my visits, and I'm interested more in the space of exhibition than the presence of art objects in those exhibition spaces. And also I'm really interested in very contemporary exhibition spaces where like there's almost nothing. It's like the white cube. So from all these paintings of these in-between spaces where like there's no art really installed, I thought it was a great opportunity to install those paintings in, again, an environment that had inspired them. And this painting is titled MoMA. It's from a photo I took at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and along with the previous one also in the new building just opened a few years ago. And what I found interesting in these very devoid of details images, they gave me a pretext to work painting paradoxically and with more freedom and more pleasure. It's compared to the work that I just showed from '98, which was much more closer to representation and closer to the photographic source. The system allows me to get closer to painting through mostly the representation of the light, the gradations of lights in those spaces. In some cases, though, I still represented also art objects, pieces of art in those spaces, but I always chose very minimalist pieces. Like in this case, it's a piece by Terranusco that is a kind of a shelf or a very, very stretched kind of sink that is on the wall in marble. And from a photo I took in at Marybone Gallery a couple of years ago. And what I like with this kind of objects is that they get confused in my paintings between the composition, the space that's depicted, and the object become one, and you don't know exactly what you're looking at. This is another piece. Those two last pieces are quite large, 8 feet by 6 feet, which is a scale that I wanted to work with because of the scale of the room, which is quite a large room at the museum. Again, this is a piece by, this time, James Turrell, a detail of an installation that is at the PS1 in New York, and working it a bit in the same way that I just described. It's a detail from the piece. This one from Dan Flavin, from the photo I took of a Dan Flavin piece, but the neon becomes this kind of white zip, a bit like the Barnett Newman, and the color is obtained by the reflection of the neon on the wall. But all that translated to photography, and then again translated, photographic result translated into painting, it becomes something much more difficult to figure out. There's also like smaller paintings in the show that were again done from photos I took in diverse exhibition spaces. This one from the lobby of a gallery building in Montreal where there's a few parallel galleries. But there's almost for me in kind of almost symbolist atmosphere in the light that is moving through that structure of this diptych, you know, echoing maybe the works of Amershoy, the Danish painter, things like that. And one of the most minimal paintings that I did, that was for the most ambiguous, was done from not an art environment, but storefront that was closed in New York City, and there was like 2 sheets of styrofoam that were like overlapping and blocking, and it's this kind of image that I am interested by these days. Like, it seems like the work is getting more and more devoid of figuration or representation details, and it's really more and more condensed into like these very kind of minimalist images. Voila.
Yeah, those are amazing projects, and the most recent one, I think, is, in terms of Canadian art coverage, is a victim of the fact that David Deitcher wrote a beautiful piece on your work just the year prior.
Yes, yes.
So, but one of the things that interests me, did you ever resolve that question with Stéphane about the photographs not being art? but showing with the paintings, because the first project was like a memorial, and this notion in the last project that, you know, your source photos are either not art or they're taken near art, but where art is not the center focus of it, and yet the paintings are so dense and condensed and focused and absolute at. How does that sort of formula resonate for you? Are you always conscious of creating paintings out of something that is not art? Is that always your subject matter? Is that a concern?
It's always been like that since I started to make paintings. I mean, let's say like since when I was a student, you know, like I arrived at the university in the late 70s, where completely, almost oppositely to today, you know, where in the painting world there's like so many like possibilities and openings and freedom, you know, for painters. There was a lot of interdictions, and
because I see it as the perfect metaphor for true. Like, if it's true, it's not art, but art gets at what's true. So I think maybe we should open it up here to some questions. It's 20 to 1. Maybe we have 5 minutes worth of questions before we have to leave. Are there any questions for our panelists? Yes. Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
The one photo where there was the man on the ground and then a cop kind of on top of him smoking a cigarette, that he broke the guy's leg. You just watched it?
I didn't know he was going to break his leg.
Oh.
He just got okay.
And that's all.
No, I guess I should, it sounds kind of harsh just to say, yeah, I broke his leg, but I mean, yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing is that if you're going to go, you have to go, I guess. And I mean, of course, personally, it's something that I wish didn't happen, but it's something that did happen. And at times you see things that aren't exactly, you know, what you want to see, I guess. But sometimes you have to see things that you don't want to see, if that makes any sense. Charm and vodka. Takes a long time, but it's about trust. It's absolutely about trust, and that's the only way. I think I said earlier, you know, maybe now in my work I am judging, but during the process of actually doing it, I'm not there to say what I believe to them, you know. And yeah, well, that's you just have to be absolutely open and kind of accept who they are, and they accept who you are, kind of thing, you know. And yeah, I mean, of course, they always think I'm a spy and I'm there to ruin their lives and stuff. But after a while, you know, it just becomes about it's a relationship between two people, essentially. You know, I think part of it also is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just a very sort of subtle game, and you just kind of have to prove that you're actually engaged by who they are and what they are, regardless of what it is.
Another question? Yes.
In addition to that, do the subjects know that the final product is going to be for public viewing?
Yep. Yeah, I'm very open about who I am, what I'm doing, and where the work's going to go, and I show them photographs. You know, I'll mail it, or the next trip I bring some photographs and I show them. And yeah, I mean, I always have my camera out. I've got my, I kind of play the role of a photographer sometimes, you know, and here's my camera, here I am, and I always say exactly where I intend the work to be as well.
Do you feel that maybe they played into that as well, like especially with the interrogation photos?
Yeah. At first they did. Well, yeah, at first they did, and as I say, it's like earlier, it's about a game of chicken, which is what it really is. And this time I actually won the game of chicken. And basically what it, you know, There is, it's like a process that you get involved in with your subjects and vice versa. And of course, at first, you know, I felt that the police were certainly performing for me because they were, you know, kind of, but in the same sense, they were also, I mean, it's difficult when it comes to sort of this idea of absolute truth, which we're never going to get at, but my friend told me actually the police aren't doing what they really should be doing. They should be breaking these guys' noses and stuff, but by your mere presence here, you've actually saved them from like a very severe physical beating. Which then I felt, well, good, but then also I felt kind of bad because you're performing for me, and it's still a performance regardless of what that performance is. Well, and I just need them to be them, you know? And eventually, it took 4 months, but eventually we just kind of got sick and tired of each other, so they did their job and I did my job, essentially. So it's just sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And, you know, those photographs, the first out of in the series, essentially, the 16 photographs that came out of it all really came within the last maybe 2 weeks. And it took me 4 months to finally get to that point where we both just kind of understood what it is that we're going for. So.
Okay, let's close it with Sarah.
Hi. A couple of comments. I was just in Sao Paulo at the Biennale, the opening of the Sao Paulo Biennale, and it's art equals politics equals art. And I think it's, we're just, you know, to respond to your introduction, I think there's a kind of return at an international level to concerns about kind of social intervention in art after a period where that's been sort of pushed to the periphery. And there was a great deal of video, well, digital video and video material. I'd say almost 70% of the Biennale was video-based, which I thought was really telling a lot of emerging artists from Latin America and the Southern Hemisphere. Within that context, the pieces that didn't use a realist strategy and had called upon a larger vocabulary of art, and I come out of that realist documentary tradition, I have to say were some of the most powerful pieces. So I think there's a whole dialogue about realism and formalism within realism and what speaks to us that we have to really pay attention to as we make this return to the real. And so I just wanted to remind us that there's been a lot of critical thinking about the nature of documentary that came out of the verite movement in the 70s and 80s. And people like Thomas Waugh, who's a really important kind of film and video critic, have talked, I think, very eloquently about how cameras construct reality, and the presence of the documentary maker constructs the reality as well, which is not a criticism of the work. It's just that it's one of those processes. But I had a different question. It was for Myfanwy.
Oh.
Okay, and it was it's a bit of a historical reference. So I was very touched by your use of Disney, who of course was infamous for his anti-miscegenation. You know, he was
and he was also an anti-Semite as well.
Right, and so Fantasia is in fact his philosophical discourse about how the races should stay separate. And then in Hitchcock, that line in The Birds, which is very much about, you know, if the underclass of the species, i.e. the races, ever flock together, we who have power are doomed. So I just wanted to ask you whether you were also thinking about, and also Hitchcock was quite an anti-miscegenist himself.
Oh,
so,
he was.
So
I know he was terrified of birds.
Yeah, well, so I'm just curious because there's this whole discourse around race, of course, and of course in your photo practice, I mean, I love it that you've got these decades of kind of references going back to how history kind of has its strands that carry through. So just curious if you were thinking about that in your choice of the sparrow.
I mean, I think it's sort of like that idea of the alien, you know, and who is alien and what is alien, you know, and about how we kind of, you know, focus on certain kinds of things. It's sort of in a broader way. I just really noticed that there was a parallel and a dialogue between this sort of different species like of birds or, you know, animals that had been introduced elsewhere. Kind of mimicked a little bit of the sort of political rhetoric that happens in the United States, of the sort of like defending our borders and everything. And then the fact that Hitchcock's film was based on Daphne du Maurier's short story, The Birds, which was set in England after the war, and it's sort of like the birds are kind of dive bombing and everything. So I think there's a kind of a tension there that, but I don't, wasn't specifically, addressing that, but there was this kind of notion of who is alien and who is not alien. So, yeah.
Okay, it's almost 10 to 1, so okay. I think we're going to wrap. The panelists have been great, so thank you all.